Greetings, YouTube. Today I want to talk about a hothouse, or more specifically, the hothouse effect. So I'm going to postulate a dystopian future wherein humanity does pretty much nothing to forestall the warming of the planet. And sometime in the latter part of this century, those in power, both the politicians and the owner class, realized that they've screwed the pooch by lying to the people of the world and telling them that nothing was going to go wrong. And things have just gotten out of hand, and there's not going to be any way they can stop the greenhouse effect. It's just gonna keep rolling. Uh, the population of the planet is probably going to be roughly 10 billion by that point, we'll say. It's a nice round number to play with. Um, but those with the money and the ability decide we really should do something about this because, some of us are more equal than others, and we should probably survive. So I'm going to put forth some ideas of how people will survive both on the planet and off the planet. So this is a very rough sketch. This is the kind of thing that would be well suited to, say, maybe a cyberpunk setting. From the setting that I think the rules for like Cyberpunk 2020 would fit this well. The mutant epoch, if you pull out some of the wackier parts of it, particularly if you want to have biologically or designed organisms. You can probably do GURPS biotech, groups and their some of their slightly more advanced technology, but not into the full-fledged superhero stuff. There's a number of different ways you can go with this. So it's going to have kind of a cursed Earth vibe to it. So I think one of the things you're going to see is vaults, not in the vault tech sense of vaults, but like, for example, the government of the United States expanding on Cheyenne Mountain, making it, say, 10 times larger than it currently is, enough room to house all of the government, all the Congress and their families, plus the requisite soldiers to defend them and keep order, keep the systems running, the technicians and things, plus servants and entertainment, however you wanted to imagine entertainment, for a bunch of rich, powerful people who will have the very ability to declare life and death over anyone that lives in there. Speaking of that, I imagine that there will probably be death sports that will eventually evolve because people are going to be inside this vault for probably centuries before the Earth begins to stabilize weather-wise, climate-wise. Yes, I understand that there's a difference between climate and weather. So you're probably going to get like 10,000 people crammed in there at one point. And I imagine that there'll be something similar in other parts of the world. So you may have like, say, 20 to 40 of these types of big mega vaults in the world, each with enough genetic diversity that they could be a seed for repopulation of the planet afterwards. But of course, there's multiples of them. You're also going to be seeing, for example, colonization in Antarctica, because all of the ice caps are going to have melted by this point. So Antarctica is now an open land mass and probably the coolest spot on the entire planet. So it may be temperate, or if you want to get really push it over, maybe it's even semi-tropical down there at this point. So there are going to be land masses down there, and that's going to be the largest population of any humans that survive, but it's going to be brutally totalitarian, with governments having set up little fiefdoms, and anyone that doesn't belong is going to be exiled out to the wastelands or even driven off the continent of Antarctica completely. I think you're also going to see aquaculture, both in surface aquaculture, big liners, maybe floating atolls, semi-submersibles or full submersibles that move around the world, the harvesting plants and things, are moving with the current. They could be passive, they're having very little active motion. You could be seeing permanent underwater colonies because they're not going to be affected by the temperature of the surface as much. And though where there will be warm waters for the types of things that people are going to want to live in is going to probably be much different than the way they are now, because the equatorial zone of the planet, probably on the surface and under the water, may very well be completely uninhabitable. I mean, I can't imagine what the equator is going to be like in a world that's going to have runaway greenhouse gases. Um, and you're also going to have full-blown aquatic humans, genetically engineered to survive in the oceans. And they're going to be the wild card because they may be allied, they may be completely independent. So you're going to see the widest variety of different social structures, I think, amongst them. You're also going to see pockets of humanity surviving on the surface in select places. Maybe in northern Canada, maybe the tips of South America, some of the islands, nations that are still above water might still have some places. People could become moles by spending all of their time in the daytime in underground bunkers, individual bunkers like family size or maybe clan size bunkers as opposed to the big mega bunkers the rich and the powerful and the governments have. Um, and those little pockets may amount to 3 or 5 million people worldwide, but they're going to be very far apart, and those numbers could be very small. So you could be looking at some interesting genetics and some interesting developments for language and technology and cultural variations. Think Arc 2 or Thunder the Barbarian for some really tacky, silly stuff. We get the point. So I think that on the Earth there may well be, say, just shy of 100 million people, maybe only 50 million people left. So enough to keep the species viable, but there's also the possibility there's going to be some distinct genetic drift. There may be people that are full humanoids that have been bred to survive in this new world. So they may bear very little resemblance to us because they have been genetically engineered to survive in a world that is much hotter, much more radical weather conditions, an atmosphere that may be less healthy as far as the breathing is concerned, a lower oxygen content pertains. Who knows? It's going to be very harsh. And they may have also not been bred to be all that smart. So you may be looking at essentially like orcs or ogres, that kind of thing they eventually evolve into. There was a novel I read, I think it was called CV, if I remember correctly. It's just the letters CV, but I'm not positive, that dealt with the aftermath of the greenhouse gases. And one of the researchers did was release a plankton into the upper atmosphere, genetically engineered, that turned the sky green, but it slowed down the penetration of the sun, and it helped to eventually cool the planet. And it was designed so that it would produce ozone to replenish the ozone layer, and as the oxygen content got higher and higher, it would actually be killed off by the ozone and oxygen combination. So it would sundown itself. So eventually the skies would become blue again, signifying that essentially the world is healthy and survivable on the surface. And then some of the people come out and begin to discover some of the lost treasures of our age, the 21st century. And they briefly touch upon like the subaquatic colonies that survive, and they had gotten so advanced that the walls of their colonies weren't even physical. They were like force fields and stuff. It was very cool. Now we're going to jump off-world. Now, off-world, you have a lot of possibilities. You've got an L5 station. You've got the moon. You've got Mars, of course. You have belters. And you could have genetically engineered versions of different human lines suited to these different environments. You could have people purely living in nomadic lives in slow motion ships that just kind of travel from place to place on solar sails. They're nomads, traders from place to place. And of course on Earth you're going to have those kind of traders too. These different bunkers and things, they could be using aerial transportation, or maybe even some functioning subterranean trains, some massive scaled, intracontinental or even intercontinental railroads connecting different places. There was the Amtrak Wars, a series of books I read dealt with that concept, was across North America, these great tunnels that went under the earth, and they connected the different bunkers, which were actually dying off slowly. But yes, I've read a lot of dystopian novels in my day. Uh, and of course, those colonies, the ones that survive, will be raiding all the little small fry, or even each other, for slaves, for entertainment, for resources, for information, for just books and things that they didn't have copies of when they went under. So there could be a trade between them for a rare movie or song or album or literature, things like that, or artwork, things like that. So there could be still some things going on, and you could have adventures with like tankers who go from place to place over across land, across hellscapes. Thinks of Damnation Alley, the novel, not so much the movie. The movie is cool, don't get me wrong. It doesn't bear as much resemblance to the novel, really. It was the novel was more about armored vehicles, but they were more individual vehicles that were transporting between different places that still existed in the United States, and that was very much Cursed Earth, Judge Dredd kind of a vibe. Uh, so you've got off-planet survivors and on-planet survivors, and each of them could be heading in different directions, both culturally and genetically. So you could almost be getting into the post, human zone, transhuman zone, if you really wanted to. And maybe some of the people out there just decided, I've had it with Earth. We're going to go that way, and they're gearing up or have already geared up to get out of our system and just to keep going. And they've taken what they can culturally from our system, and they've decided they're going to use that and what they want to create something brand new somewhere else. And you can have sublight if you're going to be a Newtonian universe, or if you can have some kind of jump drive or something like that, or maybe even some kind of a psionic-driven drive if you want to get into a little more wacky wahoo stuff. If you want to introduce that to your campaign, you might even actually be able to pull this off with Star Wars D20. That could be kind of interesting. But okay, so this is just some ideas of riffing off the top of my head. I literally thought about this last night at work because I was trying to keep myself from panicking deeply because I was having a really rough night, and this helped distract me from anxiety at the moment. So let's talk about the greenhouse gas effect, the hothouse Earth, and what would survive, what do you want to survive, what do you not want to survive, and do you think that what's the best system for it, and what would you do with it, and what were the best storylines? You could be doing in-vault, espionage or political stuff. You'd be doing on-the-surface stuff. You could be doing aquatic things. You could be doing stuff off planet. You could be connecting them all together. So there could be lots of possibilities here, even though the number of humans overall is fairly low. Maybe even with all of these included, you're probably only going to have 300 or 400 million humans left, even if all the different places are added together. That's still a lot and allows you a lot of flexibility for adventuring. And the technology is going to be vastly different from Mad Max all the way up to stuff, skirting the edge of things like Babylon 5 and things like that. So you're going to have a wide range, and some people are going to be they're illiterate, they're scrambling for survival, piecing junk together to survive on a surface world that's become harsh to humans and maybe being preyed upon by genetically engineered humans that were designed to live in this harsh world. Super soldiers, super mutants, things like that. So there's a possibility of that Fallout vibe here as well. So let's talk about the hothouse. When we do nothing and we're left with the remnants.